All right, so as always, we're going to get started by creating a brand new project. So I'm going to CD over to my desktop and then my web development folder. And inside here, I'm going to create a new directory that's called to-do list -v1. And this is because in this module, we're going to be building version 1 of this to-do list, which we will continue to improve in the next module. So we're going to call this to-do list v1. Of course, feel free to create your project anywhere you wish, but once you're done, let's CD over to it and we're going to create some files. So I'm going to use touch to create a index.html as well as an app.js. And finally, I'm going to initialize npm. And I'm just going to keep all of the default options and hit yes. And finally, I'm going to npm install. So you can use npm I for short if you wish, if you don't want to type out the entire long word that is install. So as you get used to this, you can start using this as a shortcut. So we're going to install Express as well as Body Parser, our good old standard modules. So once that's done, let's go ahead and open this project up using Atom. And we are now ready to begin developing our brand new app. So let's head over to our app.js. Now we've already set up our app.js or our server a few times now. And every single time you set up a new project, you're pretty much doing the same thing. So sometimes you might find it helpful to simply create a template file that you can paste in here with all of the parts that you commonly use. For example, changing the JS hint to ES version 6, adding in our Express and our body parser, creating our app, creating the first get route on the home route, and then writing the app.listen on port 3000. Now, this is very repetitive, and so if you don't want to type it out every single time, then feel free to take a look inside the resources section of this lesson where I provided the app.js file that you can simply copy and paste into your own app.js. Now, however, some students find that they want to get extra practice and they want to write out more code. So both ways are equally fine, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which path you want to choose. But let's just walk through this. We're requiring our two packages that we just installed, Express and Body Parser, and we're creating our app constant by using Express. And then we create a simple get route that just sends the browser the words hello when a user tries to access the home route. And then finally, we listen on port 3000 and we console log that our server has been started. Now, if any part of this is confusing at all, make sure that you don't skip any of the previous modules because all the knowledge builds on each progressive module and it might get a little bit confusing if you jump around in the course. So take a look back at some of those lessons if this is confusing at all. It shouldn't be, because by this point, this should be pretty familiar to you. All right, so let's talk about this res.send, because so far we've been passing data from our server, our app.js, to the browser via this send method. And we've been saying response, as in the response from our server, is send this message. So that's how we've been passing data around. Now, this allows us to perform some logic on the server side. So for example, we could, do some calculations. Let's say var a equals 3 plus 5, and then we can send this variable a back to the browser as a response to the browser. So that allows us to do a lot of calculations or processing on our server side, and then only once that's done to send the result back to the browser. And this allows us to render different results to the user depending on the logic that we include inside our server. Now, let's write some logic to test if the current day of the week happens to be on a weekend, and we're going to send a message depending on the day. So we're going to write some logic code inside our server where it's going to be processed, and then we're just going to send the result back to the browser. So let's create a new variable called today, and this is going to be a new date. This is just bog standard JavaScript. And then we're going to say if today dot get day, which gets the day of the week as a number, So for example, Monday will be 1 and Saturday will be 6. And then we're going to test whether if this number is equal to the weekend, which is Saturday for 6, or it could be Sunday, which happens to be 0. So we'll say if today.getDay is equal to 6, or if today.getDay is equal to 0, then in that case, we're going to res.send a message saying, yay, it's the weekend. Alternatively, or rather else, then it's going to be a weekday, a working day, and we'll instead send So we've created our conditional statement that tests whether if the current date when the request to the server is made is equal to a Saturday or a Sunday, and then we send a different message depending on whether if that is true or false. So today, as you can see, is currently a Thursday, and hence that's why I'm recording this video, because it is a working day. So let's see if we get this message triggered when we run our app. So I'm going to go over to Hyper, and I'm going to start off my nodemon on app.js, and then I'm going to head over to my localhost 3000 to see the message being sent. Boo, I have to work because today is a Thursday. So let's just make sure that this is actually working by checking to see if it is Thursday. So if today is equal to 4, which is Thursday, then it should send me this message. And of course, it's not the weekend. I'm just pretending that it is to make myself feel better. So let's go over to our localhost, and of course, nodemon's been monitoring our changes and it's already started the server. So if I just go ahead and refresh, then we trigger the different message because today is indeed number 4, Thursday. Now, you might wonder, where did I get this method from? How do I know how to do that? Then, of course, remember that this is just standard JavaScript. And if you don't want to search through MDN or you have trouble finding it, then there's always good old Google. So you could search for something like get date of the week, JavaScript, and we get W3 schools and MDN and Stack Overflow, all telling us the same thing, which is we need this get day method. And if you want to look at how you can use it, then of course head over to the documentation for that relevant method. Then you can see that we can create a new date and we can get the day on that date. And it will tell us Sunday through to Saturday, which is 0 through to 6. So just a quick reminder that the documentation is like your family. Sometimes you find them difficult to deal with, but they're always there for you. So let's continue. So as you can see, our code is now working. Now, if you want to make this a little bit better, you can, for example, say var current day equals today dot get day, and that way you can reduce the amount of repetition over here by saying if current day is equal to 6 or current day is equal to 0, Saturday or Sunday, then do this, or if it's false, then do that. That just reduces it by one step if you find that helpful. Now, what if we wanted to send the data back to the browser as HTML? Well, we can do that by still using res.send, but in this case, we're adding our HTML elements in, so our tags. So I can add a opening tag and a closing tag to whatever we send back. And this, when we refresh our website, you will see gets rendered as proper HTML. Now, here's the next question. What if we wanted to send multiple pieces of HTML back to the browser? Well, we can't use res.send anymore because this only allows you to send one piece of data. You can't write a whole bunch of res.sends. When the server sees res.send, it sees this as the final sending instruction. But we can use a different method called res.write to send multiple pieces of data. So for example, we can say res.write, boo, I have to work. And we add another one above. Let's say this is a paragraph tag instead. And instead of saying, boo, I have to work, we're going to say it is not the weekend. And once you're done with all of your res.writes, then you can write res.send. And this basically sends off all of our messages. So let's hit save and refresh. It's not the weekend. Boo, I have to work. So we get two pieces of data. And the way to think about this is it's almost like writing in something like a messenger versus writing in email. So when you write in messenger, you're using res.send and you have to send all of your message in one go. Whereas with something like email, you can write one line, then write another line, and finally hit send. So this is kind of a different process and allows you to send over multiple pieces of HTML. And only once you're done do you call res.send. Although it is a bit painful though to keep writing res.write for every single line of HTML that we want to send. And that makes it really difficult if we want to send over a bunch of HTML, for example, like an HTML page, right? Because then we have to add the boilerplate code and every single line of that boilerplate has to be added using a res.write. So good luck with not getting repetitive strain injury on that. So as we've seen before, the way of getting around this is we can add a whole bunch of code to our index.html. So let's add in our boilerplate and let's give our title a name. Let's call it to-do list. And inside our body, we will send, let's add an H1. It's a weekday. Why are you not working? So just to show you, we can basically paste this a few times and let's just pretend that we have a average sized HTML file. And instead of doing this res.write, we can use res.send file to send over the entire file that is at the directory name plus our file name, which is index.html. So now when this else statement is true, it's going to send over this file. So let's refresh and you can see that it's sent over all of this HTML in one go without us having to write res.write for however many lines, 25 lines of code. Now, the problem here, though, that you might realize is if we wanted to send over a different response depending on the logic in our server, then we would have to write many different HTML pages. So we would need a HTML page that is called weekend.html, then we would need another one that's called weekday.html, and if you wanted a different response for each day of the week, then you would have to make 7 of these and send them over individually. So that's also pretty painful. And you'll find that as you get better at programming, you'll find that your tolerance for pain becomes inversely proportional with your skill. So the more skilled you get, the less tolerance you have for repetition. And if you think about it, if you wanted to create, say, a blog, then are you really going to make a post1.html, post2.html, and so on and so forth? And in our case, we're making a to-do list app which has the current date. Are we really going to make separate HTML files that have mostly the same code? No, right? Because remember, what are we? We're programmers. What have we got? All the codes. So every time you're doing something repetitive, the reflex of a programmer should tell you to try and use code to make your life easier. That's what it's there for. That's why we use computers. So How can we make our lives easier in this case? Well, templating. That's what we need. We need to create a HTML template where we can change certain parts of the HTML depending on the logic in our server. So this is why we need to learn about templating. And in the next lesson, we're going to be creating our very first template to solve this problem. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.